this week we are talking about what causes tics. And we are going to look at it from two different perspectives. So when I started out with my son, the only perspective that we knew was the conventional perspective. Go to the doctor, get a diagnosis. Go to the neurologist, be told to just ignore it, sweep it under the rug, and spank our child. Go to the next doctor, be told, oh, you need to take all these medications, 6 of them at once. Go to the next doctor, be told, oh, those medications are not going to work. Take your kid off all of those medications. That is too many medications. So we went down this rabbit hole where I knew in my soul that there was something deeper going on with my child. But the conventional approach just wasn't hitting it. They were telling me to ignore it. They were telling me to sweep it under the rug. They were telling me that it was just neurological, that a tic was just neurological, ignore it, maybe he'll grow out of it, which is really what most people are told. And this is the conventional perspective on tic disorders. It is the conventional perspective on Tourette's. Of course, with Tourette's, they're not telling you that you are going to grow out of it, but here's what happens. So when we have a tic disorder diagnosis, in order to get a Tourette's diagnosis, you need to have a couple of things happen. One, you need to have both a vocal and a motor tic. So let's say that you are clearing your throat and maybe jerking your neck, or clearing your throat and clapping your hands. You have a vocal tic and a motor tic. Those tics can change. You do not have to have the same vocal and motor tic, but you have to have a vocal and motor tic for a year or more in order to get a Tourette's diagnosis. So here's what happens. Many of our kids start out with a tic disorder diagnosis. Hey, maybe they'll grow out of it. But when symptoms don't improve, we go back to the doctor a year later and they're like, well, your child has Tourette's. There's not much you can do except take these medications that are not, they're prescribed off-label. They're not designed for tic disorders or Tourette's, but they're going to give you some medications that are prescribed off-label. So this is really how the conventional perspective works. My perspective, and the whole entire reason that I wrote TikTok, was to give parents a completely different perspective on their child's tic disorder, on their child's diagnosis. Because I know from my own son, I know from working with clients over the past 6.5 years that clinically, tics are not purely neurological. There's so much more going on in the body that tics are not purely not neurological. So last year, there was a really great study that came out that said, oh, we found that Tourette's and related disorders, tics, OCD, ADHD, all are stemming from an imbalanced or dysregulated immune system, which is a fantastic study because it is a whole different look on tic disorders. Oh, it's come from a dysregulated immune system. Great, that's fantastic information, but we want to know, what do we want to know? We want to know why your immune system is dysregulated in the first place. And this is where my approach, this comprehensive neuroimmune analysis, this test don't guess approach comes into play. Because if we had never tested my son, if we had never tested myself, if my clients had never tested all of these things that we are working on, we would have been shooting in the dark. We would have been going round and round on the medication merry-go-round and never getting any answers. We would try this medication and that medication. So Cincinnati Children's Hospital put out a really good study that tells us that medications prescribed for tic disorders and Tourette's do not cure tics and Tourette's, and rarely do they reduce symptoms more than 50%. So as parents, we go in thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to get this pill. It's going to make everything better. All of these things are going to stop. We no longer have to watch our children struggle and suffer. We're going to have this pill and it's going to be amazing. But your doctor doesn't go in and tell you, hey, you know, there's this study from Cincinnati Children's that says these drugs may not work to reduce symptoms more than 50%, and they will not cure your child's tics. So they are prescribed off-label, meaning that they are created for something else. So for example, guanfacine is created for blood pressure. And they've started giving it to kids with tic disorders, which if your kid doesn't have blood pressure issues, you may have a whole host of other symptoms going on because you are using a medication that's prescribed off-label. It's not necessarily used for the blood pressure. It's being used for something else, and it may cause you a host of other symptoms. So we have to look at it from this perspective, that we as parents go through this process in my opinion, very uneducated. And I think it's incredibly important for parents to be educated, for parents to understand that you have two different perspectives. You have the perspective that conventional is the way, just ignore it. They might grow out of it. If not, here's a pill and you can go round and round. You can go to your doctor's appointments. You can sit in the lines to pick up your prescriptions. You know, all of these things that you as a parent deal with. And I know as a parent, I was highly uneducated. This is why I wrote the book. So what I want to say when I'm looking at tic disorders and when I'm looking at them from the clinical perspective is I want to look at the current data. I want to look at the current studies. So translational medicine means that studies that are done now, so studies that are done in 2023, will not be taught in medical school for another 30 years. To me, that's staggering because you have so much good data, you have so much good information happening right now, but it's not going to be taught in medical school for 30 years. Why? Because they have to study it and study it. They have to decide, is this going to be valid when we're, going to medical school and they're teaching these things? And so if you have a physician right now that graduated 30 years ago, so let's say they are, 60 years old, they graduated when they were 30, unless they are really staying on top of the data and reading all of the studies, which most physicians do not have the time to do because they are seeing a caseload of patients and they are extremely busy, So when we are looking at that aspect, we have to understand that your physician may be 60 years behind. Why? Because what that physician learned 30 years ago in medical school was already 30 years old. So you have to look at it from this perspective. We need physicians. They are amazing for this acute care. You have a heart attack, you break a leg, but maybe not as much on the level that they're really digging into the studies and they're really digging into the data and they're looking at what might really be going on under the hood. So let's talk about the perspective that I have as the holistic, natural perspective on tic disorders. Tic disorders are not purely neurological. We can look at this study that I did not do. This is not my study. We can look at this study and say, okay, tic disorders, Tourette's, related disorders, OCD, ADHD, those kinds of things, all are stemming from a dysregulated immune system. So my question then is, well, why do we have a dysregulated immune system? What is throwing your child's immune system off? Your body holistically does not mean I'm gonna rub crystals on you and sage you. Holistic means whole body. So your body works like a symphony and you want your symphony to sound beautiful. You want all of these amazing sounds. You want everything working in harmony, right? You go to a symphony, maybe your kid plays the violin in the orchestra at school and you want to hear beautiful sounds. You want it to that sounds so amazing. You want your body to function like that as well. You want all of these instruments in your body to work in conjunction, to work together. But what happens when you have an imbalanced immune system is that you start to sound like the Nightmare Before Christmas band. If you guys have ever watched Nightmare Before Christmas, you know what I mean. It's like, it sounds terrible. Why? Because those instruments, those parts of your body are no longer functioning properly. Your orchestra is out of tune. Your holistic function of your body is out of tune. It's not working properly. So what causes that? What causes a dysregulated, imbalanced immune system? So you have to look at 4 factors. And these are the 4 factors that I have found over the last 10 years of clinical experience, research, education, that I really find cause issues for kids with tic disorders that are really setting off that imbalanced immune system. Stop for me. So one is we want to look at environmental factors. What is going on in your environment? What are you cleaning with at home? What are they cleaning with at school? What are you storing your food in? What are you cooking your food in? What food are you cooking? Are you focusing on good, natural, whole foods-based diet? Or are you eating a bunch of processed stuff? Because grains strip nutrients from your body. So we want to look at what's going on in your environment. Are you cleaning with pine salt? Are you cleaning with bleach? Are you one of those people that you're like, oh, my house isn't clean unless it smells like bleach, which bleach is neurotoxic? What is going on in your child's environment? We have to look at these environmental factors. This is really, really important for looking at these environmental factors. So one, we have to look at environmental factors. And yes, your kid spends a majority of their time if they're school age, away from your house at school. So you have to look at what's happening in this environment. And, you know, my prime example was my kid would go to school and he would come home and he would be red-faced and his eyes were swollen and his nose were swollen and he'd be ticking off the charts. And I'm like, what is happening? I'm going to march over to school. I'm going to figure out what's going on environmentally. The teachers were burning oils. They were burning Scentsy. My kid is extremely sensitive to smells. Also, people who can't detox are going to be very sensitive to smells. If you have a toxic burden going on in your body, you're going to feel like, ugh, all those smells make me nauseated. Why? Because you don't detox very well. That is a huge sign that you don't detox very well. So when we look at that, we have to look at number one is what's going on in your environment. You know, and your foods you're eating are going to play a role in that. What is going on in your environment? Okay. Next, we have to look at biological. What's going on in here? What's going on inside your body? This is biological. So if you have an overabundance of toxic burden, we call this, you know, total body burden. If you have an overabundance of toxic burden, you guys hear the word toxins and you think, oh, like glyphosate. Yes, that's one of them. But your body can also make toxins inside of itself. So if you have a lot of mold toxicity, maybe from the foods you're eating, or maybe you're living in a moldy environment, your body is going to create its own toxins. They're called endotoxins. If you have an underlying infection, your body is creating its own endotoxins. So you do create your own toxins within your body. So we have to start to look at what's going on inside the body. Biologically, we have to look at what's going on in the body. So we talked about environmental factors. We're going to talk about more in depth of those biological factors. So not only can your body make its own toxins, but do you have leaky gut, which is that intestinal permeability? Are food particles and medications and things like that getting into the bloodstream and altering your immune system response? So, you know, is there leaky gut? Is there food sensitivities? Are you eating a whole bunch of processed stuff? Is there a bunch of inflammation in the gut? So this way we can really start to look at what are those biological factors? What's going on biologically inside the body? This is where we use that comprehensive neuroimmune analysis. This is where we use that test, don't guess approach. This is where we start to get answers. And I have a lot of parents say, oh, well, what is the one thing causing tics? There's not one thing. It's a perfect storm. It is a perfect storm of immune system dysregulation, meaning there's many, many factors. So I see kids with a lot of underlying infections. I see kids with leaky gut. I see kids with a total toxic burden. They're, you know, spraying the playground with toxins. They're playing on these rubber mat turfs, all of these kinds of things. So you have to look at what's going on inside the body. You have to look at that. And I'm doing that work on myself right now, but you have to look at what's going on inside the body. Environmental, biological, physical. We are not meant to sit on our butts all day long. And our kids spend the majority of their day sitting on their butts. They go to school. They do not get enough physical fitness at school. The physical fitness that schools offers has been greatly reduced. So unless your kid goes to a really awesome school, they may not be getting a lot of physical fitness. They may be sitting on their butts a big portion of the day. And some of them come home and they're going to play video games. They're not going to be active. So you have to look at the physical as well. So we shouldn't sit on our butts all day. Is there any kind of physical alignment issues? Like, you know, chiropractic care can be very complementary to what we're doing. But, you know, is there some physical things? Maybe you're not getting enough exercise. Maybe you're over exercising. I saw this post one time about these parents who were making their kid run 10 miles a day on the treadmill because they felt like it helped his tics, and which can cause stress in the other direction. When you're looking at these hidden stressors, over exercising can cause a lot of stress. So what are those physical attributes that are impacting your child? So there's physical attributes. And finally, there's mental and emotional. And mental and emotional does play a big role with the clients that we are working with, because I feel as parents, we are not fully equipped to teach our kids how to cope. They get a diagnosis that's very stressful for them. You as a parent do not know how to cope with that diagnosis. So you are stressed out and you are anxious. And I love to tell people that anxious parents breed anxious children, because your kids can pick up on that. They can feel if you're anxious about like what is going on in their life, what is happening. They are going to be equally as anxious. And I know just from personal perspective, I don't have the tools to teach my kids to equip them with that ability to cope and be able to handle that and create the goals and the things that they need to do. And so we actually work with another program to help people who need those skills, who need those coping skills. Some of you might have them, but I'm going to say, based on the amount of time I've been doing this, most people do not have that. So mental, emotional is a part of it. But when we hear about stress, That's our go-to. We hear about stress, we think, oh, mental, emotional, my boss is a jerk, there's a bully at school. But it really is above and beyond that, because so many of us have been told, don't talk to your kid about tics because it'll just make it worse. And then you have a child who's very confused about what's going on in their body because you're not talking about it, but you're very stressed out and they don't understand why you're so stressed out. So mental, emotional does play a role. So when I look at the causes of tics, I am looking at dysregulated immune system. But why do we have that dysregulated immune system? This is where we start to dig in and look at environmental factors, biological factors, physical factors, and emotional and mental factors. We have to look at all of these things together holistically. We want our symphony to sound beautiful. And if we're not looking at all of these factors together, your symphony is going to sound like the Nightmare Before Christmas band. So when we start to dig into tics, there are those two perspectives. You have that conventional perspective of tic disorders. Maybe they'll grow out of it, sweep it under the rug, just ignore it. Or you have the perspective that I really set forth in the TikTok book about tics are not purely neurological. And there's so many reasons and so many factors why tics are not purely neurological. And we have to look at all of those. So when we're doing this testing, we're looking at over 1,000 biomarkers with my clients now. So we're looking at what's happening in the gut. What's happening with the foods you're eating? Do you have food sensitivities? Remember, food sensitivities are delayed. They are not the same as food allergies. You have to look at what's going on, in your environment. So looking at, are there environmental toxins? Are there heavy metals? Is there mold toxicity? Looking at all of these different things. And then genetics plays a role. So we know that when we look at genetics and the studies on tics and Tourette's, is there's not necessarily one gene that they can target. And that's not what we're looking at. We are looking at how to optimize your nutrition, your diet, your lifestyle, your environment, using what I call genetic nutrition. We are making sure that your kid is getting all of the nutrients and things they need to keep their body in balance. So that being said, that is really how I view tics from the holistic and natural approach. There is a reason that it is happening. You have to look under the hood and figure out why those things are starting to happen. All right,